In the last few modules of the course, we built the back-end API that we'll be working with in this part of the course. However, there are some additional endpoints and tests that I've added to the API that we'll be using now as well. These weren't covered in the course material, just for the purpose of brevity. So now I want to quickly introduce you to those new features so that they're already familiar to you when we use them in the coming videos. Now before we start, make sure that you've checked out the Module 5 branch from the source repository and that you've rerun npm install. That's going to ensure that you've got up-to-date project code. Since we've got some new endpoints now, and some of our existing endpoints have changed, we're going to need new and updated Postman requests as well. So what I've done is put this file postman.json in the root directory of the source code. So you can now import this file into your Postman environment, and that'll give you an up-to-date set of requests. To import the request collection, go ahead and click Import at the top of Postman here, and now choose that file. So it should be in the root, and it's called postman.json. Click Open, and it'll probably say a collection print bay already exists, assuming that you named your collection print bay. So you can go ahead and replace the existing collection. If we look now in the collection browser down here, and we'll open up the print bay folder, and we now have 9 different requests, which includes three new ones, including this patch items ID, delete items ID, and get users logout. Let's go ahead and open up the patch request first. So here you can see a patch endpoint and the path URL items followed by a dynamic ID. The purpose of this endpoint is to allow an admin to update an existing item. So to see how it works, first make sure that your server is running and that you're logged in via Postman as the admin user. What we'll actually do first is open up the post items endpoint in order to create a new item. So let's go ahead and click send. And once we've done that, the ID is going to be stored as an environment variable up here so that we can use that in our patch request. Now also notice that the title of this one is from Postman. All right, so coming back to the patch endpoint, in the request body, we can define an object with the fields that we want to change. So already here I've got the field title, and I'm changing that to updated. So now if we send that off, you'll see that we get a 200 status, and and in the body you can see the item that we have updated. See, it's the same ID, but now the title is changed to updated. So one other thing to note is that this is an authenticated endpoint, so you're also going to need to supply the token in the headers for this one. Let's now open the delete endpoint and try that one out. So this one has the same URL structure as the patch endpoint, and the purpose of this one is to allow an admin to delete an existing item. So we've already got an item ID in our environment variables, so let's just go ahead and click send on this one, as there's nothing that we need to include in the body. And you'll see that we get a 200 status, and we get the deleted item in the response body. Now I've also added a script to this one, and what this does is it sets the item ID to null in our environment variables because the item ID will now be invalid. Now just like the patch request, this one is also authenticated and restricted to the admin user. With these 2 endpoints added, it means we now have the full array of CRUD operations available to our items resource. In other words, we can create, read, update, and delete our items now. Changing to our user resource now, we've got a new endpoint for this resource as well, which is the logout one. So this one's a GET request, and the URL is URL users logout. So let's go ahead and send that off to test it. Now, assuming that you were still logged in from before, you should have a valid user token in your environment variables. And once you've sent that off, assuming that you get a 200 OK status, what you'll notice is that in the headers of the response, there is no token. And the way this endpoint works is basically it will delete the token from the user model. And that effectively logs out the user because it invalidates the token. Now this one has a script as well, and this time we set the token environment variable to null. So once you've run the request, you should see that there's no current value for that. And once again, we do that because that token can now no longer be used. I've also created unit tests for all these new endpoints. So you'll see, for example, the unit test for the patch endpoint here. Plus, I've created some unit tests for the login endpoint, which is something that we didn't cover in the last module. Now, I'm not going to go over the test code in any detail now, but feel free to take a look at these in your own time. There's another significant change I've made to the API that I want to explain now. So if we make a request to any endpoint that includes a response body, for example, get items, and then take a look at the data, you might notice something different here. So the ID property doesn't have an underscore in front of it anymore. Now remember that the IDs that we've been working with are all MongoDB IDs, and these are always expressed as underscore ID. That's just a convention with MongoDB. So to change it, I've altered this JSON transform method. And remember that this method is responsible for turning a model into a JSON object when we send it as part of an HTTP response. So what I've done in the output is simply change the underscore ID property to just a plain ID without any underscore in front of it. But this only affects the outputted JSON object. Now the reason I've done this is to make sure that our public API conforms to the conventions of RESTful APIs. So in a RESTful API, resources are expected to have a valid ID property like this, and that means there should be no underscore in front of the property name. Now why does this matter? Well, some of the software that we're going to be working with on the client side is going to expect our data to include a valid ID. And if there were to be an underscore in front of it, we'd probably have to reconfigure that software so it understands that, and that's just going to be a hassle that we don't need. The last new feature I want to show you on the back end is an additional seed script that I've made. So you'll see here in our development database that we now have a bunch of seed items in here, like this self-portrait by Vincent van Gogh and several others. So these are all generated by this new seed script. And the reason this is important is that we're going to need dummy data like this to help us develop the client app. Over here in our seed file, you'll see that we've got this new method in here now called items. And what this does is firstly clears the database of any items, and then it loads in this file seeddata.json, and then finally the method will insert all that data into the database. And looking inside the seeddata.json file, you can see all the seed items here, and you can easily add more items to this file if you want, or change the existing data. So to run the seed, you can simply go ahead and type npm run seed. Once that completes, you'll see that we've now seeded not only the user accounts, but also 10 new items.